Premier Danielle Smith, the media was trying to convince you not to come here and sit with PragerU.
You heard that, hey? We're in a bit of a rough patch with our relationship with the United States right now. Alberta is a subnational government in the same way that a state is a subnational government, and we're located just above Montana. I kind of like to describe us as the Texas of the North. I think similar character, a little bit of an independent streak.
That's why I like you.
It's really unfortunate that we have a few of those areas where there's a very high tariff. 98% of all goods that go between Canada and the US are tariff-free.
Our president knows how to negotiate.
Yep.
And he also knows who he's negotiating for, the American people. And Americans are starting to ask, how much should America take on when it comes to the rest of the world? Premier Danielle Smith, I love that your team calls you the new Iron Lady. Do you know that?
I didn't know that.
I totally see
but
why.
I am a great admirer of Margaret Thatcher. I got involved in politics just after she left office, and my social circle talked a lot about that historic relationship between your president, Ronald Reagan at the time, and Margaret Thatcher, and how they really changed the world. So she was a great inspiration to me.
Yeah, well, the people who changed the world are the people who were truly willing to run against the herd. And I'm sure there's always a balance between listening to the advisors and then listening to your heart and listening to God and making the right decisions when all this pressure is on you, which right now there's a ton of pressure on you. I know that the media was trying to convince you not to come here and sit with PragerU.
You heard that, hey?
I heard about it.
It is, we're in a bit of a rough patch with our relationship with the United States right now. And I've taken a bit of a different approach. I tend to believe that if you've got a problem in your relationship, you talk more rather than talk less. You engage in diplomacy. And so my approach has always been that we have this historic, wonderful relationship with the United States. We're going to go through a little rough patch, and then it will be back to being an historic, wonderful relationship in the future. But if you don't take that view, you can say things and do things in the meantime that might damage the relationship. I don't want to do that. And so I've taken a bit of I feel like I should come down here and help to persuade some of the influencers that are down here that the path that the U.S. president is taking is not going to be good for our country, but even worse, it's not going to be good for the Americans either. And that's part of the reason why I'm here.
Well, at the very least, I hope that Canadians appreciate that you are not the leader that hides under the table when you have something important to say. And I think that the world is changing in that way, where at least we see this in the United States of America. What we appreciate about Donald Trump, our president, is that he's very transparent. Mm-hmm. He doesn't hide under the table. We know what he's thinking. Sometimes people might think that we know too much of what he's thinking, but really, I think we appreciate that. And this idea that politicians should always read from a teleprompter or be extra, extra careful because, God forbid, they actually share the truth with the people who are following them and holding them accountable and voting for them. I just think times have changed, not just in the United States, but I'd hope to think that around the world, people just want transparent leadership.
I think that's the case. I mean, but remember, we're coming off 10 years of cancel culture, 10 years of saying one thing the wrong way, having a microaggression, misgendering someone, that could get you canceled in the public sphere. People were losing their jobs, especially in the idea sphere. And so I think that now we're seeing that people understand that's gone a little bit too far, that you don't end up getting to the bottom of any problems if you can't speak sincerely and you can't speak your views. I still think maybe we're a little bit further behind in Canada, being able to have that full, robust debate on all issues. But I think that the world is certainly looking for some honest discussion. I think it's the only way that you ever get to the bottom of problems. You have to hear different sides, test your own ideas, and then either you change your view or you come back thinking, okay, I'm stronger in my views than ever because they've been tested. I've always felt that. I came from a talk radio background. I tried to have that full, robust discussion, and I'm glad we're getting back to that again.
Yeah, aren't Canadians exhausted by political correctness and censorship? And I know you all went through the Freedom Convoy with the trucks during the lockdowns. I just as an outsider, as an American, I made this joke as we were walking into one of the team members saying, I don't think they have freedom of speech in Canada. And they're like, well, we're not quite sure. But don't you want that? Don't you want to hear the truth? Don't Canadians want freedom of speech?
I can tell you that I think there's pockets of it for sure. And what you're beginning to see is that if you cannot have the honest conversation in the mainstream media, that there's a number of alternative media sources that are coming out, podcasts and bloggers, as well as those who are doing YouTube videos. And so I think you're seeing this around the world, that people will find an outlet, not only to express their own views, but to be able to have a platform so that people can come together and hear views that they may not see expressed in the mainstream media. I don't know that that's healthy for our democracy, to have everybody balkanized in their own corner. I prefer if we could all have a kind of a common platform where you can have some robust debate, mix it up a little bit, but that you ultimately have all sides represented. And I think, again, you're getting there faster in America, maybe because you do have a bit more of a free enterprise media model. In Canada, because our media has been seeing a huge loss of revenues due to the advertising revenues going online, they've resorted to going to the government to get support. And anytime you have to rely on the government for support, I think that there's maybe a little bit of self-editing that goes along, and maybe a little self-censorship. But because we still have the alternative media, I think that is allowing us to continue to have a full range of views represented. I can see, though, why you think that it's moving in the wrong direction. There is legislation that came forward in the previous government that would regulate not just speech on radio and television, but also the podcasters and those on the internet. And it never got enacted so that we could see exactly what that would mean. But that was the fear, is that individuals would be deplatformed if they broke the political speech codes. And we're in the middle of an election right now, and I'm sure that once we get that resolved, we'll see whether or not that kind of legislation comes back or whether it's gone.
Premier, where do you get your values from? You're obviously very strong. I opened up with this statement that your team calls you the new Iron Lady. Maybe we can hear about your background a little bit. How did you become this new Iron Lady to your team?
Well, it probably goes back to dinner table conversations with mom and dad. I do tell a story about when I was in junior high school social studies class. And I came home because my prof was talking about the Soviet Union, and he seemed to be talking about it in a way that communism was a positive ideology and a positive system. And my dad, who has Ukrainian heritage, he knew about the Holodomor, and he didn't appreciate that his daughter was being indoctrinated that way. So he went and yelled at the teacher, and then realized we had to talk more about politics around the table. And so I got a lot of my exposure to political issues through dinner table conversations. I realized pretty early on, sadly, that there wasn't that balance in the social studies classes and K-12 education. I sought out political science classes and economics classes when I got to university, but I really got involved in politics when it was my first opportunity to vote, 1992, and there was a lot of things going on, federal elections and provincial elections and leadership contests and referendums. And so I gravitated towards the conservative campus club, and I've been involved in conservative politics ever since.
Where does a young Canadian go for free enterprise ideas?
Well, my pathway was after I finished my English degree, I went back to school for an economics degree, and I discovered the Fraser Institute. And the Fraser Institute is a little bit like your Cato Institute. So they are their adage at the time was seeking free market solutions to public policy problems. So they would take a problem that you were grappling with in government and see if there was a way to be able to use free enterprise or free markets or internal markets or market mechanisms, competition, price transparency in order to be able to solve problems. So I had a chance to intern there after I was done university, and I've maintained a lifelong association with them. But they are our preeminent free enterprise think tank and have fostered a lot of other think tanks and other groups that have come out of it, including after I left their internship, they helped me with setting up the Canadian Property Rights Research Institute. So I got a bit of a grounding in some advocacy back then as well. But there are a few organizations like them. We have a Canadian Taxpayers Federation, which is, I think, a little bit like I think you've got a National Taxpayers Union. So I think we've got a few similar types of organizations. We're a smaller country, so we've got a fewer number of them, but there is at least still some organizations that are able to do that independent work.
So explain to an American, how does the government system in Canada work?
I have tried to explain this because I know people were taken a bit by surprise that we were right in the middle of an election.
Yeah, there's an election in late April. To us, it seems like out of nowhere.
Yes, and I know that there was some thought that perhaps the former prime minister was hanging on and he wasn't really going to leave. Well, I'll tell you, I've been thinking about how I could describe it in a way that the Americans might appreciate. It would be like having your sitting president be able to have the decision to tell Congress, you're not sitting anymore for 4 months. We're just going to suspend Congress, and then we're going to finish our primary. And then as soon as the person won the primary, they immediately became the president, and then they had the ability to choose when the election was. That's what's happened in our system. So our system allows for the prime minister to suspend the parliament so that the debate is suspended, to do the election call for the nomination to replace him. And then the replacement becomes the prime minister right away, and then they can time the election.
It sounds like an immense amount of control that one person has.
It is.
It's almost funny that they call Donald Trump a dictator when you're describing to me that you basically have a system that almost allows for ultimate power.
It's the American system, I believe, because remember, we have a similar heritage. We both have a British heritage, whereas the Americans, they decided they wanted to go a different pathway. Canadians decided to maintain their relationship with the Crown. So I think what happened in the U.S. is they said, we don't want our system to become like that one that we just escaped from. And so they put a lot of different checks to make sure that you couldn't very easily make decisions. So I think it's why your Congress gets elected every 2 years, and then you've got a separate level of government, your Senate that gets elected every 6 years and are quite powerful, and then you've got the president, which is separate from the House leadership. In Canada, all of that is integrated. So in order to become a prime minister or even a premier, you have to win the most number of seats. But in doing so, then you also are able to help have great influence on the legislative agenda as well. And the Senate in our system is not elected. And so it's appointed as well by the prime minister.
Wow!
And so that's one more way in which you have way more independence in the U.S. system. The good news is that when you've gotten to a situation like both of our countries have, where there's way too much bureaucracy, where government is way too big, in our system of government, in some ways it's easier to be able to pass policies, to be able to unwind that. In your government, I guess you're just discovering whether you can. We're seeing whether the executive orders are going to stand, or whether they can be struck down by the courts, or whether they can be overridden by the Congress. So I'm watching that with great interest.
Yes, it's difficult to undo the damage of the government when you have so many heads, and so there's a lot of convolution where several programs will be taken over by multiple departments. And so when something goes wrong, guess who is being blamed?
Yeah.
Both sides, right? So,
but that explains why we're a little bit different in our system. But you do have some innovation, I think, that is happening in how artificial intelligence might be used to analyze government spending and be able to look through a vast volume of records and identify spending that may no longer be in sync with the direction that your administration's going. So I'm watching that process with interest too, to see if there's something we can learn from it as well.
Yeah, it is always an exciting thing to me when I hear that the government is willing to take steps to shrink itself.
Mm-hmm. It's not a usual thing.
Not a usual thing.
And it goes against what the bureaucracy wants to do as well. I mean, one of the things that I learned about back when I was studying Ronald Reagan's time in office and Margaret Thatcher's time in office, I think there was a term for it called the Smithsonian problem. That if you went to the agency that was in charge of museums and you said, well, tell us where to cut, they say, oh my goodness, well, of course we have to shut down the Smithsonian on evenings and on weekends, and we have to put our collections away. Like, what is the most painful possible way to execute the cut so that the politicians wouldn't dare do it? And we've gone through an exercise of trying to do that, and I've seen that as well, is that I think that bureaucracies are just designed to grow. I think that they're motivated by having more people, more money, more influence influence more programs. And so it really is up to the politicians to find a way to identify the things that aren't working anymore and redirect those dollars to the priorities of the day. I don't know that anyone's found a perfect solution to that, but at least people are trying.
Well, as Ronald Reagan would say, the government is not the solution. The government is the problem. And whenever we have elected officials, again, who are willing to recognize that more power to the government means less power to the people, then I think we get very excited. And I think this era of social media, of being able to actually convey that there are people who are stepping into leadership and are willing to give citizens more and stop taking so much away from us, this is what we're starting to see around the world. What are things that your followers in Alberta, your constituency in Alberta, what are the things that they're very focused on right now?
Yeah.
What's concerning to them?
I'd be happy to answer that. I should probably just tell you where we're located, because if you've got an American audience, just to understand a little bit about our structure. So Alberta is a subnational government in the same way that a state is a subnational government, and we're located just above Montana. I kind of like to describe us as the Texas of the North, that we've got, I think, a similar character, a little bit of an independent streak.
That's why I like you.
But we also have a similar kind of economy. When I think of Texas, I think of cattle, and I think of oil, and that's what we've got too. A big cattle industry, a big farming business. We've got timber, we've got oil, we've got gas, and we've got a free enterprise attitude. We want to make sure that we're creating an environment to attract business. We believe in our wealth creators. I always celebrate our wealth creators, because what I have found with our wealth creators, not only do they generate money for government, but they also generate great jobs for people. And when they do well, they're our biggest philanthropists. They support some of the best causes. And so you'll sometimes find in more progressive politics that the first thing they go after is the wealth creators. And one of the things you'll find in Alberta is that we're the exact opposite. We celebrate entrepreneurship and celebrate that innovation. And so what we're concerned about right now is we want to get more of our energy to market. The Americans are one of are actually our biggest customer, used to be our only customer. And one of the things that makes Canada a bit unique is I know that in the US, most of your government-owned land is owned federally through your Bureau of Land Management. It's the reverse in Canada. Most of the land and the resources are owned at the subnational level by the province. And so when I tell you that we've got 1.8 trillion barrels of oil, of which 165 billion is recoverable at today's technology, and 1.36 quadrillion cubic feet of gas, of which 140 trillion cubic feet are recoverable with today's technology. We have the ability to market that to the world. We've been stymied on being able to do that because of our federal government. They've got the ability to, just sort of like your government, be able to say yes and no to certain projects. But we're also very concerned about tariffs and what that means for our trade relationship with the United States, which has historically been so great, and we want it to be great again.
You know, it's interesting as you bring up Ottawa and the fact that your province actually has control over the oil. I'd imagine that leads to some conflict with your federal government, given that it's in your best interest to make sure that you do produce oil, but Ottawa is basically stagnating that.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Well, look at where we've been in the last 10 years. Because even in the United States, when you look at the Paris Accord being signed, whether it was through your previous administration or the Democrat administration before, we've had that same parallel in Canada. We've seen that same parallel internationally, where there was this idea that you could power an industrial economy on solar power and wind power and batteries. And I think now what we've seen with the lack of reliability, with the failure of some power grids, with the affordability crisis and inflation crisis, with the invasion of Ukraine and instability in the Middle East, everyone's realizing energy is pretty important, and we actually need more of it. That's one part. The other part is that we realize that it's not fair to the 5 billion people on the planet who don't enjoy the same quality of living that we do. That we've got to also address energy poverty at the same time as we're addressing environmental issues. So I would say that has been a rapid change. And maybe it was with the election of the US president that everybody finally woke up and said, wait a minute, we've got to rethink how we're addressing this energy picture. But there's no question, for the last 10 years, it's been very difficult for us to get pipelines approved, pipelines built, to get capital coming into big projects. In fact, in our province, there was some $278 billion worth of projects that were canceled.
By whom?
Because of federal regulatory processes that made it so difficult to get to a yes. So that, I think, is one of the things that the U.S. Government down here is trying to deal with, is with Doug Burgum and the Interior Secretary being responsible now for that Energy Dominance Committee. It's what are the different agencies that have the power to say no? Bring them under one umbrella, and let's see how we can get to yes. So we're now moving in that same direction to try to get a similar process going in Canada, or a little further behind, but at least there has finally been a recognition that oil and gas are here to stay. We shouldn't be looking at reducing production. We should be looking at reducing the impact on the environment, reducing emissions. And that's been the message that I've been trying to say for the last few years. And I think it's finally breaking through.
Well, when we first set up this interview, it was several months ago. And really my whole intention was to talk to you about energy and what a great opportunity it would be for our country, the United States, and your country, Canada, to work hand in hand on getting away from this environmentalist religion that makes no sense and it's really anti-human. And I'm going to go a little bit into a rant and somewhat of a confession that when I ran a school, and actually I taught 4th, 5th grade, I taught in Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. There was a curriculum that was handed to the teachers. Essentially, we were told as teachers, if you love the earth, you need to tell kids that fossil fuels are horrible, right? And I didn't know to question that. I was in my 20s. And so I, in fact, taught that curriculum. And years later, I got educated. And now I understand that there is no modern life without fossil fuels. And it would be great to get energy from nuclear energy, but those things are years and years away from us. Not to mention, energy is not just electricity, right? It's agriculture, it's everything else. But as Americans, for years, we've been teaching the population that we can go to net zero. And I'd imagine it would be the same situation in Canada. And so the constituency is voting itself out of existence, really out of modern existence, by deciding to share a narrative that is not just a lie, but is actually a dangerous lie. And so I'm really curious, are Canadians really waking up to this environmentalist religion that is hurting itself?
I would say that we're caught a little bit between the new approach in the United States and the historic approach in Europe, because we do have that history of being connected to Europe. We still have a lot of work to do to convince European allies that they need natural gas. I think they've begun to realize that because they were so dependent on Russia, but they still have policies in place that make it difficult to develop natural gas and use natural gas. So I think with the upcoming G7 meeting in June, we're going to be looking to see if the world is going to take a strong statement that energy security and energy affordability has to be job one, and we work on the environmental issues as technology becomes available. We're in a good position in Alberta because we started to develop some of those technologies that can reduce emissions. So we have used carbon capture, utilization, and storage. If you've actually got a concentrated CO2 stream, you can catch it, and then you can sequester it underground. It carbonizes after a couple of years, and so it stays stored. You can also take the CO2 and use it for useful products. We've been using it for enhanced oil recovery. And so that's what we have found, is that we've got pore space to allow for carbon capture. We have a number of companies that are invested in doing so. So we've got the very first petrochemical company that is going to be net zero. So they capture the CO2, bury it underground, and use the hydrogen as a fuel source. We've got net zero hydrogen projects that have developed. We have a cement company, Heidelberg, that is doing the same thing, capturing the CO2 at source, burying it, and they're embedding it into the cement to make a stronger, more durable cement. So I would say that those kind of innovations, since they're coming from the market They found consumers who are interested in buying those products. They have found investors willing to invest in those products. That's the way innovation should work. And as a result, I think we're finding a bit of a pathway where we are getting back to understanding that you need to have oil and gas in its traditional forms. You have to have innovation at a pace that makes sense so that you're not stranding assets. And maybe if you give a long enough time frame, maybe you can have your oil and gas without having the same emissions profile. So those are the things that I'm seeing. I'm keeping an open mind about it, but I would say that Canada is a little bit caught in the middle of we're not quite where the Americans are. But we're moving away from, I think, the really strident views that we've seen in Europe.
How reliant is Canada on the economy that Alberta creates?
I would say very reliant. We're not the largest economy, but the way our system of government works is that we have a federal government that takes a lot of money. And then when they have more than they need, they transfer it to other provinces. And so when we calculated those transfers, Alberta has literally transferred hundreds of billions of dollars, and other jurisdictions have received hundreds of billions of dollars. But that we don't get a thank you card in the mail.
I was going to ask you about that. Where are the flowers?
we in fact in some ways, it's one of those things. Canadians are a little bit modest. They don't want people to brag. If you tell people too much about how well you're doing, it can create a little bit of resentment. So we've been quietly, but increasingly more loudly over the years, reminding our fellow compatriots just how reliant they are on us. Because when you do see this problem of limitation of being able to continue to develop your economy, it's harming your citizens. You're not able to create those jobs, and then you're still expected to support those transfers. That creates its own tension. And so the nice part is that our fellow premiers now understand that part of the reason Alberta has become so reliant on the United States is they wouldn't let us build pipelines east and west and north. And so it's creating a different conversation. We would love to build more pipelines to the U.S. and build them south. But I think we're now opening up a conversation where we'll be able to build them in all directions and then be able to open up more markets.
What is happening with the Keystone Pipeline?
The Keystone Pipeline, again, this is one of the things that we've been frustrated about because your politics do kind of whipsaw back and forth a bit, depending on who is in the White House.
Yeah, the beautiful battle of America.
It's a beautiful battle, and there's sometimes collateral damage. And my province was collateral damage that time. We were very excited about what would have been a $15 billion project to connect the largest source of heavy oil with the largest refining capacity of heavy oil in the Texas Gulf Coast. And we were well underway. Our province had actually helped to try to de-risk that by putting money in. And then I think 5 minutes after Joe Biden got elected, he canceled it. And so we and your court in Montana made us tear up all the pipeline so that I guess to sort of cement that it couldn't be built along that route again. And so when the U.S. president came in and expressed an interest, what I think what happened in Canada is we said, okay, well, let's just take the idea of connecting the heavy oil supply with the refineries and see if there's a different route, a route that might be easier to do, that might be faster. Maybe we can twin it along an existing line. Maybe there is some way that we can streamline the process. And I can tell you our industry has found many, many projects that we would be able to do that with once we get over the tariff war.
Yes.
And as soon as we can get back to the table and have the conversation about how we can work together, I think that there's a real opportunity. What I worry about is if this tariff war continues on too long, if it creates too much harm to American citizens, and as a result, the U.S. president loses the midterms, then I think it sets all of that back. I think there's a window for us to be able to work together on this, but I don't know that it's going to be a window that lasts the entire presidency if this tariff war continues the entire presidency.
Well, I'm sure Canadians are incredibly upset about the tariffs.
Yeah.
And, Americans are starting to ask serious questions about how much should America take on when it comes to the rest of the world. And so the concept of America first is to look at everything and basically say, look, we are the biggest consumer of virtually everything around the world. We're that giant gorilla. And so we get to negotiate.
Yeah.
And, as many people around the world know, our president knows how to negotiate.
Yeah.
And he also knows who he's negotiating for, the American people. And we're big, big consumers. And so I totally understand how for our friends, I wouldn't even, because I don't think Canada is necessarily adversarial, and especially not those of you in Alberta.
Yeah.
I totally understand the reaction of tariffs. I remember having the reaction on tariffs when it came to dairy. Why do American products have to be tariffed at over 240%? That has nothing to do with Alberta. That has to do with other provinces. And so I don't know that Americans are necessarily so upset with our president, because we just feel like there's somebody who's fighting for us and showing up for us. And so that's my personal reaction to it.
It's really unfortunate that we have a few of those areas where there's a very high tariff, because I think it gives the impression to Americans that that's the relationship across all goods.
Right.
And it isn't. I mean,
it seems unfair.
There's 98% of all goods that go between Canada and the US are tariff-free. There's zero tariff. There are a few of those historical areas because in Canada, I mean, I think every nation responds to food insecurity a different way.
Yes.
Every nation responds to its farming community a different way, because it's not like a traditional business. When a business goes under, they just, capital reformulates and they just start a business elsewhere.
Yeah.
When a farm goes under, that destroys a family and it destroys a community. And we have a lot of very small farmers that we want to make sure that they can remain vibrant. So that's part of why dairy, chickens, eggs are treated a little bit differently, is it's that viability question. I think Americans do the same thing. I mean, there's a lot of subsidy that goes to corn farmers, for instance, and I think sugar farmers as well. And so I think that there's probably a similar calculation. Right. And so I would look at those as match for match. But on everything else, I mean, it is, we have to look at what the different irritants are and then deal with them one by one. What I think the Americans should be concerned about is an image. I know PragerU is really good with images. I wish I had brought this one because I got it last time I was down in the US. It was an image from an Economist article about when America in 2001, it looked at China versus America. Who was the principal trading partner back in 2001? And it colored all the nations that had America first in blue and all of China's in red. And most of the world was blue. And by 2021, most of the world's red. Most of the world has a stronger trading relationship with China than the United States, with the exception of Canada and Mexico. So Canada and Mexico have stayed loyal friends all through that period of time. And so that's why it's a bit confusing for Canadians to think we are already in a partnership in North America that benefits all parties. We're contributing to American energy dominance. We're contributing to the wealth of America because we buy more products from America than anyone else in the world. Even though we're a tiny population, we're 1/10 your size. We buy more goods than any other country in the world. And so we would have thought that we would have been the last on the list as opposed to the first on the list for tariffs. And I think that's what's caused a little bit of confusion for Canadians is now that we find ourselves here, we've had this incredible tariff-free relationship on virtually everything. How do we get back to that as quickly as possible? Because I think as soon as we do, I think the U.S. has a lot bigger fish to fry with a lot more problematic trade partners than Canada.
Do you think, given our freedom-loving approach, there's a world we can live in where there are no tariffs on the Canadian side and the American side?
I think we should work towards that. Here's the thing. I think it has to be of parity for parity. If it's parity for parity, then we're already there on most of our goods. I know that there are additional issues that the U.S. president has identified from a strategic point of view. I understand why a nation wants to be able to develop their own steel and aluminum industry. But there's probably an easier pathway and a hard pathway. Right now, Americans don't produce much aluminum at all and get 60% from Canada. So when you add a 25% tariff on that, it's just going to make it harder for the people who need to use aluminum to make products. And it's just going to increase the cost for the businesses and increase the cost for consumers. So there might be a better way to achieve that outcome. When you look at the auto industry, The auto industry is so integrated and has been since the 1960s. And you've got companies that provide auto parts who operate in Canada, the US, and Mexico. They make decisions on where they locate for a variety of different factors. Some of them are investing up to $200 million to site a place that's making, whether it's car seats or car mirrors. And you can't just up and lift all of that and move it to back to Michigan or that area. And so there's sort of the tariffs in the short term are just going to make cars more expensive for Americans, because the parts go back and forth across the border 8 times before a finished car is done. So I understand why those kinds of industries are important, but in the short term, it's really just going to hurt the industry and it's going to hurt consumers. And so we have to figure out, is there a way that we can address some of the issues that the president has, obviously wanting to see more of those products produced in America without capsizing the industry in the meantime.
More jobs here, more independence here. And I think we're realizing that the world is changing very quickly.
Yeah.
We can no longer be America fat and lazy while China is, eager and hungry.
Yeah.
And so those are the things that, we're all paying attention to right now, as I'm sure folks in Alberta too are paying attention. You want your independence. You want some self-reliance, right? I think that is the message across the world that we want from leadership, is that we want to be able to stand on our own feet, right? And in the same way that you want to be able to have your Albertans be able to stand on their own feet and not necessarily rely on some of the regulations that are coming out from that your supporters don't agree with.
The argument that seems to be breaking through a bit is the argument around raw materials. I mean, I went back because I know the president likes President McKinley, because prior to getting into that position in the 1890s, he was a big advocate of tariffs. But my read on that period of time is that even President McKinley realized that you shouldn't have tariffs on raw materials and intermediate goods, because it's the finished product that you're wanting to get the value added on. That's where the high-paying jobs are. And you do need to have the raw materials. If you need to have oil and gas, you need to be able to have uranium. You need to be able to have, I think there's like 34 critical minerals, of which Canada has all of them. And the Americans are perfectly situated to have us be the principal supplier to them, which is vitally important when you look around the world and see how much of the supply chain China has wrapped up with the kind of approach that they've taken. So that's, again, one of the reasons why Canada is here saying, hey, we're the answer. We can provide you the raw materials that you're going to need to be able to build out those great American products. And we'll also buy them once you've produced them, because we historically have done so. That I think increasingly, I think we've made that case on energy products, but I think you can make it on food products as well. We have 300,000 head of cattle that come across the border. A lot of your slaughterhouse capacity is built on being able to have that live cattle come across. We have a number of grain products for biofuels, especially canola, because biofuels are becoming an increasing part of the chain. That is also a way in which the value added happens here from our raw products. Potash, you get I think 85% of the supply of potash, which goes to creating food, comes from Canada. We have uranium. 20% of the world supply of uranium comes from Canada. The other options are Kazakhstan and Russia. So I think we've got a value proposition, but it seems like we're not able to get to that conversation about all of the great relationships we have, all of the things that we can have free trade on together. I know that there's a few of those irritants, but I hope it doesn't damage the whole relationship, because we have a few things that need to be sorted out.
I know that it took quite a bit of stamina for you to come out to the United States during this time. And one of the other things that I admire about your stamina is that you have been fighting for parental rights in your province. This is something we also have in common. It has been a major issue to see the onslaught and attack on the innocence of our children when it came to chemically castrating and physically castrating kids who have been told that they're born in the wrong body. And you have done heroic work in your province on this specific subject. I think there was a bill that you passed. I'd love for you to share some of that.
Sure, I'll tell you about the 3 bills that we did, and we took a lot of time to consult on this to get the right pathway. Because again, when we started down this pathway, there was very little counter commentary in the media, and so we were just understanding that parents want to know what's going on with their kids, and we were seeing some terrible stories that were, you probably saw them on social media as well, of young people who'd made transition decisions early, sometimes with a trusted adult that wasn't their parent, helping them along the way, and then having regret, and then transitioning
now,
backwards.
we're talking about 12, 13-year-olds who
Completely.
started taking chemicals with irreversible damage.
There's a case going on that I'm watching right now in California, exactly that. I believe the young girl began her journey at 13.
Chloe Cole. She's been on our show. Yeah.
And is now as an adult is looking for retribution, looking for someone to say, I was a child. Why did you let me do these things? And so I was very impacted by that. And I was looking at it through the perspective of a child. We do have a number of restrictions that we put on kids. We don't let kids drink. We don't let them do drugs. We don't let them smoke. We don't let them drive a car. We don't let them sign contracts until they are of an age that they can make a decision and understand the consequences of it. And so we've had some jurisprudence in our country where they've kind of determined when a kid gets to be around 15, 16 years old, they're able to start making some of their medical decisions. And so we decided that we would draw the line that anyone who is under age 16, if they want to change their pronouns or their name, that their parents have to approve that, because that's the beginning step. As soon as you start locking in some of that social transition, it very often leads to chemical transition. And then ban puberty blockers under age 16, ban surgeries under age 16. And so that's one part of it. The other part of it is making sure that girls and women have the right to compete in sport against other biological girls and women, because we've also been watching as some unfairness has emerged in some sport.
Incredibly unfair.
And so we took a bit of a leap getting out ahead of where some of the other jurisdictions were. But shortly after, the CAS report came out in the United Kingdom. And it was the most comprehensive survey of these kinds of interventions with kids. And they found out that there just isn't really very good long-term studies on what happens to kids who transition early. How many of them continue with it? How many transition back? What is the pathway on that? And that's a pretty dangerous thing to be doing to a young child, is having them make a decision at a very young age that will affect their ability to have kids of their own one day, and not have good evidence for it. So we felt we found the right balance, and we're watching to see what the rest of the world ends up doing. But I think there's a number of European countries that already have gone in this direction, and we're just wanting to make sure that innocence of childhood is preserved, the relationship between parents and their kids are preserved, and that we're not having any of these kinds of regrets that happen if somebody makes a decision before they're ready.
How are Canadians reacting to this bill?
Well, there was sort of a first emotional reaction from the activists that I kind of expected would happen. But then I think because we tried to find a very reasonable way of arguing it and a very reasonable approach, I think on balance, we've managed to carry the debate. The interesting part is we're the only province who has put forward that menu of options. Some of the other provinces have gone down the pathway of making sure parents are informed if pronouns change. But we thought the most important part was the medical intervention, because that's when it gets permanent. If you start on puberty blockers and you don't go through puberty, you can't have kids. And if you start doing surgeries, those are irreversible. And so we wanted to make sure that we were dealing with the whole package. We don't mind being first on some things. We don't mind doing a few things that are bold, and it seems like our citizens are supporting us.
Ben, do you think that the other premiers, when you speak to them and you talk to them about this bill, are they in disagreement with you? Or are they just too afraid to fight against the religion of transgenderism. That's what I personally call it. I think it's a religion if you're willing to sacrifice children.
You've seen it here, right? You know that there are certain states that are more open to the kind of ideas that we're talking about, and other states that are less open.
Yeah.
And I would say that we've got the same dynamic happening in Canada. We're a bit more of a conservative jurisdiction, similar to Saskatchewan. That's our neighboring province. Those two provinces tend to be a little bit more conservative and a little bit more supportive of caution in these kinds of matters and parental rights. But I would say that there's just a different perspective. Different political perspective, depending on which subnational government you go to.
And it's interesting that you bring up the other states. So, PragerU is run out of California, and Governor Newsom is the governor, and he is very good at listening to what the people are saying, right? And so suddenly now Governor Newsom is saying, well, I actually don't think it's fair that a woman is forced to fight or compete. That a young woman is supposed to compete against another man, essentially, or a transgender man in sports. And so what has happened is, I think in the United States, now that the media is freer and parents can actually speak and they can actually hear the truth, the governors are starting to follow, and they're saying, wait a second, the lobbyists are becoming less powerful than the people because the people are starting to speak up. And so even Governor Newsom from California is hearing the people and less lobbyists, and is starting to shift his messaging. And so the bold and the brave who run against the herd are going to win. You mark my word.
Well, this is why thought leadership is so important, really. I mean, it's why it's funny that you say Prager University is located in California, because the institute that I work for, that Free Enterprise Institute, is located in BC, and BC and California share the same kind of politics. So, but that is, I think, why the independent media is important. Independent think tanks are important. The advocacy is important, because the ideas have to at least be out there so they can be debated. And I think reasonable ideas will always win. If you shut down the public square and don't have the debate, then you can't move the dial. And I'm hopeful that more of these kinds of conversations will take place on more issues.
Yeah, and the truth should not be insecure, right? Well, why do you need to shut the truth if it's the truth? If you're not lying, what is it that you're trying to censor? Yeah,
exactly. Well, I think it is a big political discussion, right? I mean, conservatives like to do things a little bit differently. Conservatives, I believe, I mean, this is what you're seeing with the way we do government in my province, is that we begin by believing that an individual has inherent dignity, and that we want to do whatever we can for human flourishment, for that individual to grow into an independent adult, and marry, and then form a family unit, and then that family unit becomes the social safety net, and then be involved in community, whether that's a church group or a Rotary Club, so that becomes the first line of defense if something goes wrong in the community. And then government steps in as a last resort, not a first resort. I would say that the ideology on the other side is there a way for government to intervene first? And it seems like there's always this pressure of make it bigger and further away from people. So big, grand national programs, so that you don't have what they call a patchwork. But every time you do that, you're just ending up funneling so much money away from tax-paying citizens into big bureaucracies. And you might not even end up solving the problem in the first place. So, but that is the reason, right? Those are the two big ideological poles that keep going back and forth. And maybe we're moving more towards supporting the individual, the family, the community, the free enterpriser, and maybe a little bit further away from the big government solutions. We're trying to move that along.
Yeah, every time people want the government to take care of them, they lose their freedom.
They do, and it costs them a lot of money. And that's I guess the real, because then what happens is, if the more you get taxed to pay for the programs, then the less money it leaves you to be able to take care of yourself and your family. So
how do you feel about government healthcare?
It's funny when you talk about what makes Canada different from the US. We talked about our British parliamentary system, which we retained. But healthcare has been one of those things that Canadians have said, this is a value that we have that is different from the US. So in Canada, you have to go in a queue and you have to wait your turn when you need to have a surgery or treatment. But you'd never be in a position where you'd lose your house because you ended up with unpaid medical bills because there's only one payer. So one of the things that is challenging that we have to do as a free enterpriser, and this is one of the things I learned at the Fraser Institute, is that you have to look to have market-like mechanisms. You have to be able to have transparent prices. People should know how much things cost. You have to be able to have competition so that those different facilities that are able to do more surgeries or treatments get more patients, get more money. Those who are going to use some of the latest technologies. Those are the kind of things that you want to reward. You want to see more of that innovation. And so those are the things that we're talking about now, is how do we create a structure so that you can have different service providers, single payers. It'd be like having a single insurance program, but have the competition of the different service providers. Let the patients dictate where they want their dollars to go, whether it's to their local doctor or if they need a treatment, and then just see if you can make the market work without having to throw the entire system over. Those are some of the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, when I think of government healthcare from Canada, I think of really great beginning of life care and probably very good end of life care.
Yeah.
And that middle piece, I think of Canadians coming here to the United States for specialty care if they can afford it. I saw some survey that 42% of Canadians would come to the U.S. to receive care if they could, which is an astonishing number. And so it's one of those things where the government might take care of everybody equally, but everybody might be equally worse off.
I'd like to, I mean, one of the things that the U.S. did, which I'm really interested in and I'm going to copy, is there was a hospital act that passed or came into effect in 2021 where any of the hospitals that receive government money through Medicare or Medicaid have to post their price list of their top 300 surgeries.
Which, by the way, we have incredible corruption in the medical field here in America as well. I'm not saying that the system here is perfect.
There's no perfect system.
There is no perfect system. Half of us don't, because of, the healthcare providers that have to go through insurance companies. And so half of us don't know what we're paying for either.
Yeah.
But at least there's some competition.
Yes.
Right.
And so that's where we're trying to go. We'll have a bit of a different system, but we want to try to get that price transparency just so that we can see, because if you have one of the things that is really interesting, because you can have competition even though you have government paying. And I'll give you an example of this. There's a hospital in Ontario called Humber River Hospital. And what they discovered is that if you allow the surgeon to book both the operating rooms at the same time, you can end up doing vastly more surgeries. If you only have one surgery room booked, you can only do 4 or 6 surgeries because you have to clean up and then clean up the room, get your equipment, get the patient ready. But what happens is if you can do both rooms at the same time, you're able to do 14 surgeries in that same block. And so those are the kind of things that you can still innovate. Doesn't matter who the payer is, but that's the kind of innovation that you want to stimulate. We just signed an agreement with Siemens, and Siemens has been providing our equipment to treat cancer for a number of years. They're now using AI, and what they want to do is use Alberta as a model. This is brand new research so that they can take the treatment period of time from diagnosis to treatment from 2 weeks down to 2 hours, so that you would be able to go in, get your scan, running through AI. Yeah, you got a problem. Get a doctor to say, yeah, you really got a problem. Let's get you in. And that to me is going to be really exciting to be on the cusp of that. So I think we can do innovation in our system, even though I'm not going to deny it. We've got problems with waiting lists. It's true. But you know where I think government in our country can have a real value, and I don't know how you're going to deal with this in the United States, is in the area of mental health and addiction, which has become a real problem for both our countries. And we had some of the highest number of opioid deaths in Alberta, exacerbated because of COVID and some of the addictions of despair and self-medicating that occurred as a result of that. And so what we decided to do is we decided to bring mental health and addiction into our publicly funded system. So no user fees, no waiting lists, building out more beds. Because what we were finding, and again, you might see the same thing, is that hospital emergency rooms had become a bit of a one stop for everything.
Mm-hmm.
Homeless person, go to the emergency room.
Mm-hmm.
Mental health problem, go to the emergency room. Addiction problem, go to the emergency room. But emergency room isn't the best place to treat somebody.
It's like triage.
Yes. And so we're creating an approach where we're giving people a prescription for Suboxone or Sublocade. That's a replacement for opioids, and allows them to get their brain functioning and clean so that they can start thinking about what their pathway is. Get them into a recovery community for 90 to for up to a year if they need that time to be able to recover and reconnect with their community. We've got recovery communities within our jails. We've got 4 jails where we're treating people on site so they can get clean while they're serving their time. And we're about to move forward with something we call compassionate intervention, which is ordering people into care. That if you've got somebody who is causing harm to themselves or others and is just a chronic user of the system. We had one person we tracked 186 times used an emergency room last year because of overdose. That's $1 million that is being spent not treating that person to get them recovered. So we're then going to step in and say that's a person that needs to be ordered into treatment 90 to 120 days and then get them onto a pathway to recovery. So I don't know if that would exist in a truly free enterprise system. I don't know how they would be able to do that in a truly private market system.
So in the United States, nonprofits step in for that, and there are incentives for that, but at least the nonprofits are held accountable because they're not in the middle of it in the way that the government is. It is so difficult to incentivize, let's say, a doctor. You gave the example of a doctor working in 2 operating rooms at the same time. Well, how do you incentivize that doctor to want to take on that extra work if they're not compensated for that? Or if everybody's equally compensated, why should you work double, triple the amount of time or as hard? That's really the issue. When the government steps in, you take away that incentive from the employee to work harder. And then you also take the incentive away from, it was a homeless person that you gave as an example. Why should they negotiate? Why should they even care what they're being charged if they're not being charged ever? Right. And so it's that tricky situation.
It is difficult. Sometimes you need to step in when somebody is not in a position or sound mind to make their own decisions.
Needs help. Right.
Yeah. Well, because this is one of the reasons I think that the U.S. president has brought in tariffs is because America has a very serious opioid and fentanyl overdose problem.
Yes.
We do too. But I think you deal with it both ways. You deal with it from a law enforcement way, which we are. We came through with the border security measures where we put more people on the border with drug sniffer dogs, commercial vehicle inspection, drones, all-weather drones, because we need those in Canada, as well as Black Hawk helicopters. We wanted to show we're taking the border issue seriously. So let's deal with the law enforcement side. But for somebody who's in the throes of addiction, if we're going to get them off of drugs and back onto an independent life, then we have to deal with the treatment side of it too. And we're leading on both of those in Canada, in our province.
We know where the drugs are coming from. The fentanyl, tranq, these things are coming in from China through Mexico. We know about this. Yeah. So addressing it really where it starts is so significant.
Yeah, completely.
And parents are incredibly worried in the United States about what is happening with these drugs.
With good reason, because they keep on getting more and more toxic and higher potency. But when you look at the pathway they've gone down, your West Coast and our West Coast, California, Oregon, Washington, all the way up into BC, the idea that the solution was enabling that, if you just gave safe supply and safe
San
injection.
Francisco, they're giving out needles.
Completely. And I think they had the experiment in Canada too, which was an abject failure. In fact, now we're seeing that same province, you talk about the change in attitude. Is it happening in Canada? Well, the government that had the ideology to bring in safe supply and try to do this for the last 20 years is now following our pathway. They also are going to do compassionate intervention. They've also stopped the experiment with decriminalization. And so I think that, sometimes bad ideas, sadly, have to play themselves out before they become so obvious that it's gone in the wrong direction. And at least we're now beginning to have a different conversation in the country.
Yeah, this is something I've been praying about so hard, that we just protect these kids from the drugs, the ideologies. I mean, it's really inflicting the West.
Yeah. And it's I think a lot of it, and it's interesting how you've identified all of those pieces. When I look at where do you have the culture change, where do you begin with the culture change? Part of it, of course, is K-12 education. And so in our province, we fund a lot of different education options so that you can go to a local public community funded school. We also have Catholic schools because we have a constitutional support for our Catholic school system. We also support independent schools with a smaller amount of contribution, and we allow homeschooling. We've got some of the most number of kids who are homeschooled in our province. We have this concept of a charter school as well. They're able to get the funding directly, and they have different types of programs for STEM and arts and girls programs. And so that to me is one way, is you've got to make sure that there's enough choice for parents in K-12 education. The other aspect is that we knew that we had to make greater friends with the unions, because the unions had tended to line up, I think, on one side of the political spectrum. And yet, if you look at those blue-collar jobs are happening because conservatives want to build things. we want to build, we want to do mining operations, build pipelines, develop resources. And so I think having a bit of a division in the union movement so that it wasn't monolithically on one side of the ideological spectrum was really important as well. But also the culture shaping industries, like in the media and film.
Yeah.
Those are areas where you do see ideas enforced and reinforced. So the media is important to have the range of discussion. We've already talked about that. But America's greatest export has always been cultural export through Hollywood.
Yeah, we've made some mistakes on that front.
And they're being corrected now. One of my show that everybody's talking about is Landmen.
Yep.
And it's I'm sort of astonished to see that you've got a character that is promoting and talking about how important it is to develop the resource industry. So that to me is kind of the cutting edge of where social change happens. And I don't know all of the dynamics about why those kinds of stories are now being told, but it's really important.
But have you noticed that the clip has gone viral?
Yes.
Which just goes to show that people are starving for truth.
Yes.
They're starving for intellectual truth. We're breaking through the barriers of the legacy media. In the past, you would have never been able to hear that message. But, you know, it's morning in America again. It's morning in the world again when you can actually convey truth and have clips like the one you're describing go viral, because you actually get to hear the truth about energy. Energy is freedom. It's prosperity. It's modernity. It's everything.
Yes.
And you have this clip that probably 20 years ago, you would not be able to watch. Before I went into the education, I could not watch a video like that one. And now it's literally going viral, where you have an Angelino and an Albertan both talking about the same exact clip. It just shows you how powerful that is.
That's funny. You wouldn't have even been able to have that go viral maybe 2 years ago,
right?
Let alone 20 years ago. But those are the spaces that I think conservatives need to repopulate.
Yeah.
Conservatives need to be in the media. They need to be in our arts and culture. They need to be in K-12 education, and they need to be part of union leadership as well. Because I think that those really are the areas that have led a lot of the debate in the last number of years. And maybe it was just that conservatives were busy making money and not thinking about culture as much as they should have been. But it matters.
Yeah.
It really does.
I'm going to forever remember you as the new Iron Lady. A fellow freedom lover. Yeah. What do you want people to remember you by?
Those are good things to be remembered by. I am a little bit of a nerd when it comes to philosophy and ideas. I think because I started off at the Fraser Institute and got introduced to the Austrian economists, Joseph Schumpeter and Friedrich Hayek, I've often thought about how do you apply these principles to trying to transform government. And so we're still new at it. I'm only 2.5 years in, but those ideas have stayed with me. And if we can find some ways to make government serve the interests of the public better, be smaller, leaner, more effective, more competitive, less costly, then we'd be happy to share that with the rest of the world.
Well, we're going to be following and watching you.
Thank you.
Thank you.